It really is. It's beautiful outside. The mountains are still capped with snow. The sun is shining. The sky is blue. And all of that can't compare to the beautiful people we have in this room right now, together to worship with God's saints. It's a special, special privilege that we have, that God has given us. And so let's make the most of it. I'm glad to be here with everybody. How many of y'all are familiar with the butterfly effect? The butterfly effect. If you're not familiar with the butterfly effect, it's essentially the same thing as the ripple effect that we talked about in our Ruth Bible class, only it starts with B. Ripple effect for Ruth, butterfly effect for Boaz. See what I did with the letters there? That was pretty clever of me, I think. I'm not sure if anybody would have noticed it if I hadn't pointed it out. So there you go. The butterfly effect is the idea that very small events in the past can have a large effect on the future, right? So the ripple effect was, I take a stone and I toss it into the lake. The birds start flying away. The fish get unsettled. The ducks leave the lake. And so it causes a great effect on the environment around us. And the butterfly effect is essentially the same thing, only looking forward more towards the future environment and not the present environment. The term butterfly effect originated in a short story by the science fiction author Ray Bradbury in the 1950s. And I don't know if we have any other nerds in this room besides myself, but I'm a big fan of sci-fi and fantasy. And so I thought the story was interesting. It was called A Sound of Thunder. A Sound of Thunder, and the idea was that these people built a time machine and they were going to go back in time to hunt a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Now, some of you have shot some elk or some deer, or maybe even went bear hunting or squirrel hunting, but I'm not sure anybody had the opportunity to go hunt a T-Rex before, so I think the men in this room can appreciate why they would want to go and do that. But before they got in the time machine, they were told, no matter what you do not affect anything in the past. Do not do anything differently. All we're going to do is go hunt that T-Rex and shoot it, and then we're going to come back to the future. Well, unfortunately, what they did was they went back in time and they killed the T-Rex, but they also killed a butterfly along the way. And so when they came back to the future, everything about the future was different. They had a different president in office. They spoke a different language. And then coming up from behind him, the man who had gone back in time to shoot a T-Rex heard a sound of thunder coming, and he turned around and there was a T-Rex chasing after him. Hence the title of the story, A Sound of Thunder. I really recommend that you read it. It's a great story, but what in the world does that science fiction story have to do with us today? The butterfly effect in history, in world history, is a real phenomenon that we can see happen in history in the past. Oftentimes, it's associated with a negative effect. I'll offer you the example of the Archduke who was assassinated shortly in the 1910s, 1920s, and that spurred on World War I. Right? This one man getting assassinated started an entire world war. This isn't to justify anything about this particular despicable dictator, but it said that Adolf Hitler's anti-Semitism stemmed from how Jewish people had treated him in the past. Now, that's certainly no justification for what this monster did, but because of how he got treated in the past, that spurred him on to hate and to do despicable actions and started the Second World War, right? Oftentimes, the butterfly effect is focused on negative impacts. But there's a real event in history. There's a real event in history that happened in the 1980s that was of a sort of butterfly effect that caused large impacts on the world, on future history, on a grander scale. And this event happened on November 9th, 1989, when during the height of the Cold War, remember when there was the Berlin Wall splitting West Europe and East Europe, West Germany and East Germany, and this politician, his name was Gunter Schabowski, and he was a politician in communist Germany at the time, who was invited to give a press conference on live television. Now, this politician had several press conferences back to back. He'd had several meetings back to back. And so he was sleep deprived and he was tired and he didn't have all his wits about him. And what he was supposed to do on live television was he was supposed to announce future plans to open up travel between West Germany and East Germany. And those were supposed to take place in the future. But because this politician was tired, and because this politician was stressed out, and because this politician wasn't thinking clearly, he accidentally said that these travel plans were to take place up sofort, which means beginning immediately. So he said, we're opening up the Berlin Wall immediately. So thousands of people came together and they flocked to the Berlin Wall, and the guards at the Berlin Wall had a choice. Slaughter these thousands of people or let them through the wall. So it was on that day that the Berlin Wall fell and people were able to go through. Now others have said that Reagan's speech, tear down this wall, and David Hasselhoff standing on top of the wall singing I've been looking for freedom may have had an impact on it or not. I highly doubt the David Hasselhoff story. Highly doubt that part. But we see the butterfly effect in real history. This wall fell. Relationships were repaired between an entire country. Russia and America were more united than they'd ever been before. And the world was a better place because this Cold War had ended. And peace was beginning to come back into Europe. All because one man misquoted something on live television because he was lacking from sleep. All because of this one small, tiny event. And so when I come to the book of Ruth, I see the book of Ruth as a book of butterfly effects. As a book of butterfly effects. We talked about how Ruth had an impact in the ripple effect. Now in the sermon, we're going to talk about how Boaz creates this butterfly effect. Because of what Boaz did, there was a major impact on Israel's future. There is a major impact on our own future today. And we're going to see how that happens. Through his actions, David comes into the world who unified the kingdom of Israel, and that also helped preserve the seed line of a very special individual who came along in the first century and redeemed us from sin and death today. All because of Boaz's actions. Boaz had a number of qualities that brought about this butterfly effect. Those qualities that he possessed, those characteristics, caused him to do things and caused him to take certain actions. And so it resulted in a lot of good things. So we're going to talk about that in the sermon today. But what you also have in the book of Ruth, as I mentioned in the Bible class, is not just, and I've mentioned this before, I never had an appreciation for the book of Ruth like I should. It's a short little story thrown into the Old Testament that tells us how David came on the scene, right? Except it's so much more than that. And I was forced to spend the weekend with this book, and I came to truly love the book of Ruth. And at the heart of the book of Ruth is a romance story. There is a romance story in the book of Ruth, as we talked about in our Bible class. And ladies, y'all got to hear the romance advice from the book of Ruth in our Bible class. Men, it's your turn at the end of the sermon. And as I mentioned, you probably needed a lot more than the ladies do. Amen? So we're gonna look at Boaz's characteristics, how we can apply those to our own lives to cause a butterfly effect in our world today. And at the end of the sermon, I'm going to share with you a real example of a butterfly effect, separate and apart from the Berlin Wall. But then there's also going to be some fun, cheesy romance advice at the end of the sermon. Like I said, I understand I'm the last person in the world to give anybody romance advice, but I'm doing it for God's word, from God's word. So we'll have some fun with that. So get your Bibles open and go to the book of Ruth, chapter 1. The book of Ruth, chapter 1. And the title of the sermon is Being Like Boaz, who is a man of excellence. Being like Boaz, a man of excellence. And here's our points. Boaz was a man who had a true desire to help the poor. true desire to help the poor. That's point number one. Boaz was a man who showed great discernment of character. Great discernment of character. That's point number two. And then Boaz was a man who had a dedication to always doing the right thing. A dedication to always doing the right thing. So in our Bible class, we had the 3 Ds there. Now we have 3 Ds again. So if you don't remember it after the sermon, next time I'll use an A or a B. Or maybe we'll just try some alphabet soup next time. So let's get into point number one. Boaz was a man who had a true desire to help the poor. He had a true desire to help the poor. And some of you weren't here for the Bible class, so let's recap the book of Ruth, chapter 1. There's a great famine in Israel in the days of the judges, a really wicked and nasty time in the days of Israel. And this famine was brought upon Israel because of the sin of the Israelite nation. And so Naomi, with her 2 sons and her husband, was forced to leave Israel because of the famine and went down into the region of Moab. And while she was in the region of Moab, her 2 sons took to wives two Moabite women, which was technically under the Jewish law prohibited. There wasn't supposed to be an intermarriage there. And they also weren't supposed to leave the land in that effect. But they left the land, and then Naomi's 2 sons died, and her husband died, and so Naomi is left with her 2 daughters-in-law. And her daughters, Naomi tries to send them away, and eventually one of the daughters leaves. But Ruth sticks with Naomi. Ruth sticks with Naomi and is determined to care for her and provide for her. And Ruth makes a covenant with Naomi and with God that starting now, I'm going to follow God, the God of Israel, and I'm going to live among the Jewish people. So they come back into Bethlehem, is the town that they had left, which we talked about. Bethlehem was the town where King David was from, but Bethlehem was also the town where King Jesus is from. And that's when Boaz arrives on the scene. Boaz arises on the scene in chapter 2, verse 1. And Boaz is described as a kinsman of her husband. Now Naomi had a kinsman of her husband, a mighty man of excellence, of the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. Boaz is introduced as the kinsman, which we'll talk about when we get a little bit further along into the sermon. But he's described as a mighty man of excellence. Now, other translations might translate that a little bit differently. Some call him a man of great wealth. Some call him a man of good standing. And all those things are certainly true. He is a man of wealth and he is a man of standing. But that's not what that word excellence means. A mighty man of excellence is to be a man of strong, high moral fiber, a valuable, high moral character, a man of great value, not because of how much money he has, but because of who he is as a person. And it's interesting that Boaz's name literally means in him is strength. His name literally means in him is strength. And he's described as a man with a strong moral character. In our Bible class, we talked about how Ruth means friendship and how we saw those characteristics in the person of Ruth. And so we're going to see those very characteristics in the person of Boaz. He lives up to his name's sake. He is a strong, moral man of great character. And we're going to see that. Boaz is first, he shows the fact that he's a man of high, strong moral character by his true desire to help the poor. He has a true desire to see people who are more downtrodden than he is, to see people who are weaker than he is, to see people who have not been privileged in life as much as he has. And he has a desire to help these people out. And he shows that in his desire to help Ruth out before the romance between the two even starts. Before he even realizes he has a moral obligation outside of just his obligation to help the poor. Before he sees all that, we see it in Boaz. So Boaz has a field. He owns a large field, so he is a rich and he is a wealthy man. And he has workers in his field. And he shows up at the field one day and he finds Ruth gleaning in his field. And he asks his men, who's this young lady over here? Who's gleaning in my fields? In our culture, we might think of, we have a cotton field somewhere, or we have an orchard somewhere, and we find a random stranger picking cotton or picking fruit from our orchard. We might think a little bit differently about this. Why is this person trespassing on our property, right? But the law of Moses gave a command to farmers that they were supposed to leave the corners of their field, the outside of their field. They weren't supposed to pluck from that. They weren't supposed to glean it. They weren't supposed to harvest it. They were supposed to leave it for the poor and for the foreigners who sojourned in the land of Israel. And as we already talked about, this took place in the days of Judges. And in the days of Judges, we all know that famous verse, every man did what was right in his own eyes. The law of Moses wasn't being followed in the days of Judges, except for this one man, Boaz, who followed the law of Moses and who allowed the poor and the downtrodden and the foreigner, specifically Ruth, to come into the field and glean. And not only that, the law of Moses made provisions for foreigners who had left their land and come to the nation of Israel and who had decided they're going to abandon their false gods and they're going to follow the God of Israel. God commanded the Israelite to treat those foreigners as if they were a native. And that's exactly what Boaz does here. That's exactly what Boaz does here, because he could have said, well, Ruth is a Moabite, and there's bad blood, there's bad history between the Jews and the Moabites. Ruth could have seen her, she's just a poor woman. She's a widow. Why do I want her in the field? But he kept the law of Moses by allowing her to glean in the field. But then he goes above and beyond his call to simply allow her to glean in the field. He goes above and beyond. In chapter 2, verse 8, he sees Ruth in the field, and he goes to her and he tells her, look, stay here in my fields. Don't go off into other fields. Other fields might be more dangerous for you. Ruth would have had a legal right to go into other fields. But there's no saying that those other farmers would have let her glean in the field. Stay in my field. I've instructed all my workers. There's not going to be any catcalling here. There's not going to be any harassment. There's not going to be any rudeness. Stay close by so we can protect you. Because he sees this young lady all on her own out in the middle of the field somewhere, and that could potentially put Ruth in a very dangerous situation in the wrong field. So Boaz goes above and beyond his call to obey the law of Moses by offering Ruth specific protection. Stay close by, drink as much water as you want. We're going to look after you. We're going to take care of you. And then not only that, in chapter 2, verse 14, Boaz invites this Moabite woman, this Moabitess, to dine at his own table. To dine at his own table, which was something in the days of Israel, it was uncalled for. It was something nobody had ever heard of, that you would invite a pagan, a Gentile woman to dine at your own table. And in verse 14, he offers her the best bread, and dip your bread in a piece of vinegar, and served her roasted grain. So you have the first candlelight dinner, as it were, together, the first date, if you will. And I think this is the part of the story where the romance begins to blossom. I think this is the part of the story where the romance truly begins to start, when he calls Ruth to sit and to dine at his very own table. He's commanded all the men around her to be respectful to her. He's allowed her to glean in his fields, to drink as much water as he wants, and to dine at his own table. And he's told her, you stay close to me so that I can protect you. Boaz was a man who had a true desire to help the poor. And he showed that in how he treated Ruth. From Genesis to the book of Revelation, the Bible talks over and over again about how God's people are supposed to be people who treat poor people with kindness. We're supposed to be people who treat the poor with generosity. We're supposed to be people who have strength within us and use that strength not to take over and not to conquer and not to lord it over other people. We're supposed to be people who use our wealth to help. We're supposed to be people who use our strength to help. That, in essence, is the mark of a true man who has strength within him and uses it to help people who are weaker than himself. That is the mark of a true man. And that is the mark of the true Christian who has been blessed with wealth and uses it to help other people. Are we people? Are we going to become people? Are we going to become better people who have a true desire within us to help those who are less fortunate than ourselves, who are more downtrodden than ourselves? And I'm not talking about just handing out money to people who are standing on the side of the road with a sign that says, "I need money." I think that's a very foolish thing to do, because oftentimes all you're doing is helping them to further their addictions. Oftentimes they're not using this money to buy food or diapers or whatever else they say they're going to buy. They might be using it to buy drugs and alcohol. But gosh, these people are standing right in front of the McDonald's. Can we not stop and ask, "Can I buy you a hamburger?" These people have a sign, I need money for diapers, and they're standing right in front of Walmart. Can we not ask, "What size diapers do you need?" and go in and buy them those diapers? Can we not stop and see that these people are wearing tattered clothes, and these people are hungry, and these people are cold, and these people are probably addicted to one thing or another? Gosh, can we not stop and talk with them and pray with them and ask, "Is there any way I can help you?" Helping the poor doesn't mean just giving them money unconditionally. And again, as I said, I think that's a foolish thing to do for the resources God has blessed us with, and also for their health. But do we take notice of those people when we're driving through Colorado Springs? I see them all the time when I'm in Denver, or maybe even Pueblo or other cities. When we see those people, can we not take a minute to think, how can I be a blessing to those people today? You're in a restaurant. Picture this scenario. You're in a restaurant, and they're short-staffed, and the only waitress on duty is running back and forth, and she's frazzled, and she's tired. And what you don't know about her is that she's a single mother with 4 kids at home, and she's in the middle of her double shift to make ends meet. Can we not stop thinking about how long the food is taking and put an extra $5 on her tip at the end of the meal? This lady's working hard to give us food, and at the end, we tip her $2, $3. Can we not be like Boaz, who has a true desire to help the poor? And not just physical, because if we're giving people money, we're giving people food, all that is great, and we're commanded to do those things. We need to be people who do those things. But what those people need more than anything is Jesus. You giving them that meal, you giving them that food, may plant a seed within them. And when you give it to them and they say thank you, you can say, "Don't thank me, thank Jesus. He's the one that gave me the money. He's the one that gave me the command. And he's ultimately the one that's giving you this meal." What these people need more than anything is Jesus. And that's how we truly help the poor. Not with money, not with food, not with clothing. Great things, do those things. But what they need more than anything is Jesus. And that's the butterfly effect, which I'll talk about at the end of the sermon. There are real stories of people who were shown kindness by other Christians, who went on to make other Christians. Boaz was a man who had a true desire to help the poor. But he was also a man who showed great discernment of character. Point number 2. He was a man who showed great discernment of character. We have to understand Ruth first, before we understand what Boaz did for Ruth. Ruth was a Moabitess, as I had already explained. The country of Moab, the kingdom of Moab, had oppressed Israel and made them slaves in the days of Judges. They had also enticed them to all kinds of weird idolatry and all kinds of weird sexual immorality in the story of Balaam and his donkey. There was bad blood between the nation of Israel and between the nation of Moab. And these countries were not allies, and these people were not friends. But above and beyond that, Ruth was a poor woman. She was a pagan woman from a foreign land. She looked differently. She talked differently. She acted differently. This woman is completely different And not only that, she was a widow. Her husband had passed away. And she came as a package deal with Naomi together. And then she's of unknown lineage. Who's this woman's? For the Jews, lineage was everything. Who's this woman's father? Who's this woman's mother? Where does she even come from? Who are her parents? Ruth is a woman that most people would have looked at, most of society would have looked at. This person has nothing to offer. This person has nothing to give back. This person is only somebody who is going to receive and never give back. This person is only someone who's going to take and never give back. It's not an investment worth making. But Boaz doesn't see that. Boaz sees, as we've already mentioned, Boaz sees the law of Moses that gave the people a command to watch out and help the downtrodden. But he also sees Ruth for what she is. She's also a woman of excellence. She's also a woman of high moral character. And this comes out in their first conversation. He doesn't see the Moabitess. He doesn't see the widow. He doesn't see the poverty. He doesn't see the fact that she looks differently or talks differently or dresses differently. She sees that Ruth is a woman who has committed herself to the God of Israel when she could have been worshiping the gods of Moab, who has committed herself to taking care of Naomi when she could have been back in Moab, finding a husband and raising children and settling down. He sees Ruth as a woman who is committed to the God of Israel and the people of Israel, whose customs are completely different. And this comes out in their first conversation. He'll say to Naomi in chapter 2, stay in my fields, glean from my crops, we'll take care of you, we'll protect you. And Ruth asks the question, why? What do I have to offer you? I'm a widow. I'm taking care of my mother-in-law. I can't give you anything back. I'm useless to you. Why? Because Boaz sees something in her that other people would not have been willing to see. In verse 11, Boaz replied to her, all that you've done for your mother-in-law after the death of your husband has been fully told to me. How you forsook your father and your mother in the land of your birth and came to a people that you did not previously know. He looks behind the scenes. Boaz looks behind the scenes and sees this wonderful lady who gave up everything in her life to take care of Naomi and to worship the God of Israel. Boaz sees that this is the kind of person that God is going to reward for her faithfulness. This is the kind of person that God is looking down upon and smiling. He says in verse 12, may Yahweh fully repay your work, and may your wages be full from Yahweh, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Keep those two phrases in your mind. God is going to repay you. God's wings are going to give you refuge, because those come back at the end of the story. Repay, God is going to reward you for what you've done. God is looking at you. God sees you, and God is going to make sure everything you've sacrificed to be with Naomi, you're going to get back tenfold. And God's going to protect you and provide for you, and God's going to love you. Boaz was looking at Ruth, and he wasn't seeing the exterior. He wasn't seeing the Moabitess, the different skin color perhaps, or the different way they dress, or the different accents. Boaz was looking at Ruth's heart. And we say it all the time, and don't judge a book by the cover. I'm an avid reader, and I promise you that statement is completely untrue. I judge books by their cover all the time. Literal books, yes, but what about people? Have we ever taken it upon ourselves to judge a person differently by their exterior and miss out on a very meaningful friendship or a very meaningful relationship we could have had with that person? Because they look differently than we do. Maybe they dress differently, or maybe they have a different haircut or a different hair color that isn't considered normal or natural. Or heaven forbid we ever judge somebody because they have a different skin color than we do. There's no place in Christianity for that. Absolutely not. But have we ever cut ourselves off from having a good relationship with somebody because they look differently than us. Or maybe they talk differently. Maybe they just moved here and they're working on learning the language. And all we think about is, man, these people really need to learn our language. And yes, they do. To have a function in society, we do need to have people who all speak the language. I get that. I really do. I get that. But judging people who are making an effort to learn the language, they have a different accent, they're mixed between two different languages, and they're trying to figure out how it all works. There's no place in Christianity for that. There's not. Judging people by how they look or how they talk, or even how they dress. Yes, some people dress differently, and some people dress weird. I'll say it. Some people dress weird. But you don't know what's in the heart of that guy who's wearing the man bun, or what's in the heart of that guy who has his fingernails polished. Yes, there's probably a need for reform in his appearance, and there is a need for reform in how he dresses. But how is he ever going to do that if we don't build a meaningful relationship with that person? What about judging people because they vote differently than we do? See, we have a country that is completely divided between red and blue, completely divided between donkey and elephant. And it was never supposed to be that way. I have my own political opinions, which I don't think it's appropriate for a preacher to voice their political opinions from the pulpit. But what I have seen is people who agree with my political opinions will blast the other side on Facebook, will blast the other party and tear them down and call them out. Is there immorality in political parties? Yes, absolutely. Both sides. We may see one side as more evil than the other, and that may be true. There may be a cause to call between lesser and two evils. But have you ever considered that sharing your Jesus with them might even impact their political decisions? Have you ever thought sharing your morality with them might impact how they choose to vote? But instead, what do? We divide. We can't be friends with this person because they voted for Joe Biden. I can't be friends with this person because he voted for Donald Trump. I can't share my Jesus with this guy because he has a man bun. I can't reach out to this person and offer kindness and affection because they look differently than we do. And that's not what Boaz did. And that's not what we're going to do either. We're going to be people who put the divisions aside, who put the racial divisions and the language barriers aside. And we need to be that, because that's what Christianity is all about. People flocking from all kinds of different lives. People who were born poor, people who used to be drug addicts, people who used to be alcoholics, people who came from China and from India and from Mexico and from all across the world. And they all come together and flock to God's mountain because they see the King of Kings. And when you truly have seen the King of Kings, it's one kingdom, and all those other things don't matter anymore. And they shouldn't matter anymore. And we need to learn to stop judging a book by its cover and start judging the book by its contents. That's the kind of man that Boaz was. And that's how he created a ripple effect. But he was also the kind of man who was always dedicated to doing the right thing. He was the kind of man who was always dedicated to doing the right thing. Even when shortcuts were available. Even in the darkness and the quiet of the night, when he could have gotten away with things that nobody else would have seen. And we see that, first off, in how he kept the law by letting Ruth into his field and glean, and how he protected her. But we also see that in how Boaz honors his obligations to the law of God, to God himself, and then to Ruth. At the end of chapter 2, Boaz is revealed as the kinsman redeemer. And I'm going to explain that. We talked about it in our Bible class, but we'll talk about again very briefly. When an Israelite fell on hard times, they would take their land and they would sell it in order to pay off debts, in order to provide for their family, in order just to live. They would sell their land. And in ancient Israel, land was everything. They were an agrarian society, agricultural society, so you needed your land for your animals and your crops and everything else. And the kinsman redeemer, if you had a kinsman redeemer that was a near relative of yours, they had a moral and legal obligation to purchase back or buy back the land for that relative. That's the idea of redemption, to purchase something back, to pay the price and purchase something back. And Boaz is revealed as a kinsman redeemer. And so as we talked about in our Bible class, Ruth and Naomi, they concoct this scheme together. They get crafty and creative about how they're going to win Boaz's heart. And so Naomi tells Ruth, put on your best dress, put on your best makeup, put on your best perfume, get yourself all dolled up, and then go out to the threshing floor when he's asleep, lay at his feet, and steal his blanket. A crazy scheme, right? Crazy scheme, except it's going to work, as you already saw in our Bible class. Is anybody else getting a deja vu from this sermon? I feel like I just talked about this an hour ago. It's a crazy scheme, and remember, there's nothing seductive about this at all. There's nothing seductive about this. This is calculated, this is tactful, this is well thought out, and we're going to see how it works. So Ruth comes to Boaz in the middle of the night, and lays down at her feet, steals a blanket, and then Boaz wakes up, and he's probably because he's cold and shivering, and he looks down, who's this woman at my feet? Who is this? And Ruth will say, in chapter 3, verse 9, I am Ruth, your maidservant. So spread your wing over your maidservant, for you are a kinsman redeemer. And we just saw that in chapter 2, where Boaz said, Yahweh will repay you, Yahweh will redeem you, and Yahweh will spread his wing over you. And what Ruth is saying is, you're the one that Yahweh has put in my life in order to do this. You're the one that is going to take care of me and provide for me because you're a kinsman redeemer. And Boaz could have said, well, if I redeem you, first I have to purchase the land back, which is a very costly expense. Then I have to marry you. Then I have to provide children for you and raise them up. That's also a very costly expense. But then I also get Naomi tacked onto the deal, and I have to take care of her too. This is a very costly investment for Boaz to do. This is a very costly investment. But Boaz recognizes that he has a moral obligation under the law of Moses. And he also recognizes that Ruth is a wonderful lady in which the investment is worth it. He recognizes his obligation to God, and he recognizes his obligation to Ruth. And instead of cutting corners, instead of not doing it, he says, yes, I'm going to do it. In verse 11, he says, so now, my daughter, do not fear. All that you say I will do for you, for all my people within the gates of the city know that you are a woman of excellence, a man of excellence and a woman of excellence. But there's a small problem here. There's something that has to get taken care of first before he can marry Ruth. He says, it is true that I am a kinsman redeemer. However, there is a kinsman redeemer closer than I. Under the ancient law, Boaz would have a right to redeem Ruth, but there was a closer relative who had the first right of redemption. There was a closer relative who had the first right of redemption. And in that moment, Boaz could have said, but I don't care about that other man. I don't care about the law that's in place. I don't care that he has the first right. My heart wants what my heart wants, and I'm going to marry you. But that's not the kind of man Boaz is. Boaz is the kind of man who is willing to put his own wants and wishes aside to do the right thing whenever and wherever he can. And that includes alone under the stars with Ruth at night. So he bids Ruth go back to sleep. In the morning, I will go to the kinsman redeemer and I will talk with him. And then if I redeem you, I will redeem you. And in verse 13, he says, but if he does not desire to redeem you, then I will redeem you as Yahweh lives. Lie down until morning. He waits until morning. And he says as Yahweh lives. He takes this whole situation to get some land, to get a new wife, to have children. He takes it all, and instead of immediately acting upon it, he says, as Yahweh lives, and he gives it over to God. And he says, God, whatever you decide, I will abide by that. But first, God, I'm going to follow your law. So in the morning, he sends Ruth home with 6 measures of barley, perhaps as an engagement ring or perhaps just as a gift. You know, in ancient times, I don't know that they gave the ladies flowers. They might have given them some barley or some corn or some grain. Not sure how all that worked. But he sends Ruth home. And then in the morning, he goes to the gates and he meets the kinsman redeemer. And he calls the kinsman redeemer and says, you sit down over here on this side. He calls the elders of the city, you sit down over there on that side. And let's talk about this. And the way he does it is very tactful. Hey, there's this really nice piece of land over here. You can farm and you can grow crops and you can raise your animals. And it's great. It's a perfect piece of land. And the Redeemer says, you know what? I'm going to buy it. And then Boaz says, but wait, there's more. On the day that you also redeem the land, you also get Ruth and her mother-in-law. And now you're obligated to raise up kids for Ruth and take care of the mother-in-law. And the kinsman redeemer thinks to himself, I don't think I want all that. So in ancient times, and this is in the text, what you would do is when there was such an exchange, the man who didn't redeem would take his sandal off and give it to the man, and that was a sign of the transaction. So because Ruth abided by the law of Moses, and because he followed the deal, he found true love in Ruth. He got some land, and he also got a brand new sandal, which, hey, who doesn't like sandals, right? So at the end of the story, he comes and he announces his engagement to Ruth publicly. He announces his engagement to Ruth publicly. And this is the end of the story of Ruth. This is the happy ending that every love story needs. He says, Boaz says to the elders, you're witnesses today in chapter 4, verse 9. I have acquired all that belonged to Elimelech, all that belonged to Chilion, Mahlon from the hand of Naomi. And also I have acquired Ruth, the Moabitess, the widow of Mahlon, to be my wife in order to raise up the name of the one who had died on behalf of his inheritance, so that the name of the one who had died will not be cut off from his brothers or from the gate or from his birthplace. You are witnesses today. Boaz isn't afraid to announce the love that he has for Ruth publicly. And he's not afraid to announce their engagement publicly. And so all the people see a man of excellence and a woman of excellence getting married. And all the people praise God in verse 11. We are witnesses. May Yahweh grant the woman who is coming into your home to be like Rachel and Leah, the mothers of Israel, both of whom built the house of Israel. So you shall achieve excellence in Ephrathah and shall proclaim your name in Bethlehem. Moreover, may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, through the seed which Yahweh will grant you by this young woman. Everybody's going to hear the story, is what the people are saying today. Everybody's going to hear the story of what an excellent, high, moral, strong man that you are, guys. You're going to have a great family and you're going to have a great future. And we don't see until the very end of it just how great that future actually is. In verse 13, Boaz took Ruth, she became his wife, and he went into her. And Yahweh granted her conception and gave birth to a son. Then the women said to Naomi, blessed is Yahweh, who has not left you without a kinsman redeemer today. May his name be proclaimed in Israel. May he also be to you a restorer of your soul and a sustainer of your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. You have a son. You have a son who's going to grow up and who's going to take care of you. But that's not even the greatest of the beauty of it when we find out who that son is. In chapter 4, verse 13, they say a son has been born to Naomi. So they named him Obed. He is the father of Jesse, who is the father of David. David would become the ideal king in Israel who would unite the kingdom and bring a temporary, but bring a reign of prosperity in Israel. But you take David, and then you take Solomon, and then you take the split of the kingdom, then you take Babylonian captivity, then you take the restoration, and you shoot forward from David 1,000 years. 1,000 years in the future, and you come to that very same spot that very same place, the little town of Bethlehem, in Matthew chapter 1, where our Lord and Savior was born in Bethlehem. And these very names, Ruth and Boaz and Obed and Jesse and David, all these names are part of the genealogy of Jesus. Blessed be Yahweh, who hasn't left Ruth and Boaz without a Redeemer today, but blessed be Yahweh, who hasn't left us without a Redeemer today. Because of these people, because of what Boaz did, the seed line of Christ was preserved, and so we have redemption through Jesus Christ today, because of the kind of man that Boaz was. And so the butterfly effect has come full circle. It's come full circle. Little actions in the past that have a large effect on the future. Boaz was able to redeem and provide for Ruth and Naomi. He got some land out of the deal. But more importantly than the land he got out of the deal, he also found true love in Ruth. And because he found that true love, David, the greatest king Israel ever knew, was born. But a greater king was born, the King of Kings, Jesus Christ. And so we sit in this room today because of the actions of Ruth and because of the actions of Boaz. We sit here today redeemed because of the butterfly effect. And he got a free sandal out of the deal as well. That's pretty cool, right? We need to recognize the butterfly effect is real. I'm going to tell you that it's real. This is a copy of a Gideon Bible that was given to me as a gift, and I'm very grateful for it. And this isn't the original one that I got, but when I was 14, I wasn't raised in a religious household at all. My parents weren't religious, and so I didn't get exposure to the church. I didn't get exposure to Christianity. I didn't get exposure to the Bible at all. Until one day after school, there were some men standing outside of the school who were handing out Bibles like these, Gideon Bibles. Not hardback, it was orange and it was more of a plastic cover. But one of those men handed me that Bible. And they weren't members of the Lord's church. The Gideon Bible isn't affiliated with the Lord's church at all, but they give away free Bibles. And I started reading that Bible, and I got to Matthew's Gospel, and I started reading Matthew's Gospel, and I didn't understand any of it. So I started making phone calls to the churches, small town Texas. There were only seven or eight churches. And the only church that called me back, called this 14-year-old kid back, who was asking about Bible classes, was a Church of Christ. And so because that man gave me that Gideon Bible, and because I called those churches, and because they answered, somebody cared enough about this 14-year-old kid who nobody knows and nobody cares about, took the time to answer me. You have a preacher this morning. And I guarantee you, every one of you has someone in your life who has reached out to you, who has shown you kindness, who has looked past the sin and past the differences and past the problems that you have. I guarantee you, every one of you has somebody in your life who has reached out to you. And so you are sitting here this morning because of the butterfly effect. Can we be people who imitate the butterfly effect? Can we be people who see that the butterfly effect is real? We can have such a drastic impact on the future of our country, of our world, most importantly, of the souls that are lost in sin, condemned to eternal hellfire, who need Jesus Christ. If we be people like Boaz, people who have a true desire to help the poor, who are looking for the downtrodden, who are looking for the outcasts, who are looking for the homeless and the drug addicts and the alcoholics. Can we have a desire to help those people? And can we be people who have a true discernment of character, who stop judging books by their covers, stop judging people by their political parties, and start judging people by their hearts, and by the heart that God wants to be saved, and by the soul that God wants to be redeemed? And can we be people who are always dedicated to doing the right thing, even behind closed doors, even when it means not cutting corners, even when there's an easier way? We need to be like Boaz, who is giving the law of Moses, which was not an easy law to follow, And we have the law of God, which isn't always the easiest. And sometimes it comes with real sacrifices. And sometimes it's hard when you think nobody's watching. But Boaz was a man who distinguished himself by following that law. And there's also something to be said about how he treated Ruth in the middle of the night alone, not willing to rob her of her purity. And we need to be like Boaz, who are men who are dedicated to always doing the right thing, to cause this ripple effect. Men and women dedicated to doing the right thing. And then finally, the less serious part of the sermon and the fun part. Women, ladies, you got it in the Bible class. Men, it's your turn now. The relationship advice from the book of Ruth. Dinner dates. Take your lady out on dinner dates. Do you know how happy she would be if, like Ruth, she came home and she came to the table and you had set for her a beautiful date of bread and vinegar and roasted grain? Women love that, right? Or how about this? Olive Garden has endless breadsticks, right? That's kind of like bread. And then they got the vinaigrette dressing for their salad. There you got your vinegar. And then you got the noodles and the pasta. That's kind of like roasted grain, right? Dinner dates. Take your ladies on dinner dates. Get her presents from time to time. You don't have to wait until Valentine's Day or Mother's Day or anniversary or birthday to go to the store and pick up 6 measures of barley to bring home for her. And if they don't have the barley at the store, get her flowers. Those are pretty cheap too, right? $10 or $15 for a bouquet of flowers. And there's no joke associated with this one. But protect and praise her publicly. Protect and praise her publicly. That's what Boaz did. All the men, you leave her alone. There's not going to be any catcalling or harassment. Leave her alone. It's been said, if another man insults you, you turn the other cheek. But if he insults your wife, you break his cheek. Right? Protect and praise her publicly. Talk about the good things that your women are doing for you and the good things you have because of them. And then finally, quit complaining when she steals the blankets. That's how Ruth and Boaz got married, and I think Brad has a story about a blanket that I'm not going to share here from the pulpit, but he can share it with you later. So that's the romantic advice and the butterfly effect from the book of Ruth. Thank you for your time. God bless all of you. And let's stand and sing. Hallelujah.